Dearest listeners, sharpen your fans and steady your nerves, for Lady Whistledown has returned with whispers so rich they could outshine the crown jewels themselves. Tonight, the ton gathers at Dunstone Hall beneath chandeliers blazing like captured stars. 150 noblewomen, each powdered, perfumed and perfectly ambitious, have arrived to compete for the most coveted prize in England, the heart, hand and title of Lance, Duke of Dunstone. Ah, yes, the elusive Duke. The man rumoured to have never danced since the war, whose stoic silence has driven debutantes to poetic despair. London's gossips say his heart was lost upon some distant battlefield. Others claim he never possessed one at all. Yet here he stands tonight, immaculate in black and silver, surrounded by beauty, wealth, and dangerous hope. But my dearest listeners, I shall tell you what none dare whisper aloud. The Duke's eyes will not linger upon any titled lady, no matter how exquisite her gown or well-rehearsed her smile. No, his gaze, sharp as scandal itself, will fall elsewhere. Not upon a duchess nor a viscount's daughter, but upon a maid, unadorned, uninvited, and entirely unforgettable. But what could drive a duke to forsake 100 noble hearts for a single maid's gaze? Love, scandal, or a secret only she knows? Ah, but before I reveal which noblewoman heart shall crumble first, indulge me, my ever-curious audience. Whisper to me where you are listening from, for gossip, it seems, travels faster than any carriage. And while you're here, do be certain to subscribe, lest you miss the next delicious revelation from my quill. Dearest listeners, before one judges a man's choices, one must first understand the shadows that guide his hand. And the Duke of Dunstone, Lance, is a man built entirely of them. He is a soldier returned from war with medals he despises and ghosts he cannot bury. Beneath his tailored composure lies a fracture the ton refuses to see, the kind that no title nor wealth can mend. They call him proud, unfeeling, unreachable. Yet pride, my dear listeners, is often only the armour worn by the wounded. Since the death of his mother, society has waited breathlessly for the Duke to marry. Her final will, read in secret to the family solicitor, left one scandalous condition: he must wed not for rank nor fortune, but for love. Imagine the outrage. Love, that most unfashionable of sentiments, demanded of a man who swore he had none left to give. Still, Lance endures this parade of painted smiles and practised curtsies out of duty to her memory, the last promise he cannot break. He walks the marble halls of Dunstone like a man preparing for battle once more, not with sabres, but with expectations. Each noblewoman who curtsies before him sees only the title, never the man. They flutter like moths to flame, and he, polite but distant, lets them burn out in silence. What they do not know, what even the most cunning gossip has yet to uncover, is that the Duke's heart does in fact move, just not for them. Now let us turn our gaze to the far edge of his world, where chandeliers do not shine and velvet gives way to plain linen. There, in the quiet hum of preparation, lives Jovita Downs, a maid of uncommon grace and uncommon silence. She moves with the steadiness of someone long accustomed to being unseen. Yet, should one look closer, one would find her hands too fine for labour, her posture too proud for servitude. For Jovita was not always a servant. Her father, once a respected scholar, fell from favour after a ruinous accusation of treasonous correspondence, a crime he never lived to disprove. His death left Jovita destitute, her family name whispered with pity and suspicion. She entered service under a false surname, concealing her birth and learning the language of invisibility, the art of listening without being heard, of moving without being noticed. But the past, dear listeners, has a curious way of lingering in one's eyes, no matter how carefully hidden. It is during the morning's frenzy before the ball that fate first stirs between them. The Duke strides through the grand hall, reviewing the final arrangements with the same precision he once commanded his troops. And there she is, bent over a candelabrum, polishing silver until it gleams like moonlight caught in her palm. Her gown is simple, her hair pinned hastily. yet there is a calm in her presence that halts him mid-step. For a moment, the noise of servants fades. He watches the small furrow between her brows as she works, the unhurried rhythm of her task. Not beauty, no. Beauty is cheap in London. It is dignity he sees, unspoken and untaught, the kind that cannot be borrowed nor bought. "Careful with that," he says at last, his voice low, habitually commanding. Jovita startles, nearly drops the cloth, and straightens too quickly. Her eyes, dark, clear, defiant, meet his. "Yes, Your Grace," she murmurs, curtsying, but her tone holds no tremor. It is not insolence, merely self-possession. And that, dear listeners, is far rarer than grace. The Duke lingers longer than propriety allows. "You've done this before," he says quietly, more statement than question. "I have served here for 2 years, Your Grace." 2 years, he echoes, studying her. "And yet I have never noticed you." Her lips twitch, just barely. "That, Your Grace, is rather the point of a good maid." Oh, how the tongue would faint dead away to hear such words spoken to Dunstone's impenetrable Duke, and worse, to see him smile because of them. It is a fleeting thing, that smile, gone before even he can comprehend it. Yet something stirs in him, small and perilous, curiosity. From that moment forward, he notices her everywhere. In the garden, tending the neglected roses his mother once adored. In the library, dusting shelves he rarely visits. Always quiet, always steady, as though she belongs to the very bones of the house. And though he cannot explain why, he finds her presence anchoring. Meanwhile, Jovita, for all her restraint, feels the weight of his gaze like sunlight through glass. It warms and burns in equal measure. She tells herself to avoid him, that no good has ever come from catching the attention of a nobleman, least of all one bound by duty. Yet each encounter leaves her pulse uneven, her composure thinner. Their worlds could not be further apart. He, bound by birth and legacy, she by secrecy and shame. But beneath those distinctions lies something startlingly similar. Loneliness. He hides his behind courtesy, she behind obedience. And so when their eyes meet across a crowded hall or quiet corridor, it is not recognition of difference but of sameness that passes between them. Ah, my dear listeners, how often love begins not with thunder, but with a quiet glance misinterpreted as chance. Still, gossip is a ruthless predator, and even silence cannot hide scent. One watchful footman remarks that the Duke spoke to a maid longer than necessary. Another whispers that she dared to meet his gaze. By afternoon, a rumour blooms, small, harmless, yet fragrant enough to travel. The Duke hears it, of course. His steward, nervous and apologetic, suggests he be more discreet. "About what?" Lance asks, voice clipped. "I have done nothing wrong." And yet that night he dreams of dark eyes and steady hands polishing silver. When he wakes, he feels foolish and alive in a way he has not felt in years. As for Jovita, she spends that same night scolding herself for what she cannot control. To her, he is the embodiment of everything she has lost: wealth, privilege, security. Yet when he spoke to her, there had been no judgment, only genuine curiosity, and that was far more dangerous. The ball looms closer. The grand hall blooms with flowers, candles and expectation. And while noblewomen rehearse their laughter and perfect their smiles, the Duke of Dunstone finds himself glancing not at the guest list, but at the servants' roster, pausing at one name he pretends not to recognise. Dear listeners, do not be deceived. Empires have fallen for less than a look. A soldier's discipline is no match for the heart's rebellion. And as the first guests arrive and the orchestra begins to play, Lance of Dunstone carries into his ballroom not the composure of a host, but the ache of a man already undone. For what he does not yet know, and what we, ever watchful, shall delight in revealing soon, is that Jovita Downs will not merely polish his silver or serve his wine. She will test the very vow that defines his life, the promise to marry only for love. And tell me, my friends, what chance does duty have when love dares to look it in the eye? If ever there was a night destined to ignite scandal, it was this one, the grand opening waltz at Dunstone Hall, where every glance was a weapon and every smile a strategy. The orchestra had barely begun its triumphant overture when Calamity, in crimson and silk, took its bow. Lady Marjorie Vallemont, that most polished pearl of the season, whose beauty gleamed as brightly as her cruelty, drifted through the crowd like a queen among pawns. Her laughter tinkled like crystal, her gown glimmered like envy itself. Yet beneath that poise lay venom wrapped in lace, and tonight, dear listeners, she would let it spill. For just as the Duke prepared to open the floor, a maid passed, tray trembling, eyes lowered, heart racing. Jovita, our quiet heroine, carrying champagne for those far above her station. The crowd hardly noticed her, until, with a flick of Marjorie's wrist, the tray was struck. Glass shattered. Ruby wine cascaded down silk, staining the lady's gown like blood upon snow. The hall fell silent. You could hear a pin drop, or perhaps a heart breaking. "Oh!" Lady Marjorie gasped dramatically, one hand clutching her chest. "You clumsy little fool!" Her voice, syruped in mock distress, dripped venom into every corner of the room. "You have ruined my gown. Clean it. Clean it with your tears, girl." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fans fluttered, whispers spread like wildfire. Jovita stood frozen, her face pale, her dignity unravelling under 100 watchful eyes. But she did not cry. She did not kneel. She merely bowed her head, trembling, not with fear, but with restraint. And then, silence broke. Across the marble floor the Duke moved, not with haste nor anger, but purpose. Every step struck like thunder muffled beneath restraint. The crowd parted, stunned, as he reached the fallen tray, knelt and picked up a piece of shattered glass. Without a word, he drew his own handkerchief, white linen, embroidered with the crest of Dunstone, and offered it to the maid. His hand brushed hers. A simple gesture, yet the shock that passed through the hall was enough to still the music. "My lady," he said at last, voice smooth as winter steel, turning his gaze to Marjorie, "it seems your composure has suffered a greater spill than your wine." Marjorie flushed. "Your Grace—" But he did not let her finish. Rising to his full height, the Duke turned to the assembly, the finest of England's lineage now hanging upon his every word. "It seems," he said coolly, his voice carrying over the stunned silence, "that the first test has been passed, by the only woman not competing." The air fractured. Laughter dared not follow, for no one could tell whether it was jest or judgment. The orchestra faltered, a single violin squeaking in confusion before bowing to silence. Jovita, still trembling, met his eyes for the briefest, most forbidden moment. The world seemed to tilt. His hand, still holding the handkerchief, lingered just long enough for rumour to be born. Oh, my dearest listeners, you should have seen the faces then. Lady Marjorie, pale as her pearls, the Dowager Countess, clutching her fan like a weapon, and poor Lord Bertram, whose mouth fell open wide enough to swallow his dignity whole. Whispers rose, sharp and hungry. "Did you see how he touched her hand? A maid, in front of everyone. Surely it was only pity, or something far more dangerous." But the Duke had already turned away, his expression unreadable, his voice cool. "Resume the dance," he commanded the orchestra. And though his tone left no room for argument, not a soul moved until he was gone from sight. As for Jovita, she stood trembling beside the ruined tray, her cheeks burning, her eyes lowered. Yet not a single tear fell. She gathered the shards, wrapped them carefully in her apron, and disappeared through the servants' door, leaving behind a silence so sharp it could cut through silk. Marjorie's smile returned, brittle and false. "A pity," she murmured to those nearest her, "that some men mistake charity for chivalry." But I, dear listeners, saw what the ton did not. The Duke's fingers, moments later, tightening upon that stained handkerchief, as though he were unwilling to let go. And in that small, scandalous piece of linen, a secret was born. one that would unravel reputations, defy propriety, and perhaps destroy a heart or two. Oh, do not look away now. For though London may pretend to dance in grace, it is in disgrace that true love often learns to breathe. And tell me, dear listeners, when a duke kneels before a maid, is it gallantry or the beginning of his undoing? The duke's grand test of true love began beneath chandeliers that gleamed like captured stars. 150 noblewomen, gowns rustling like restless ambition, stood poised to prove their worth. Not through beauty or title, but through kindness. Or so the Duke's decree proclaimed. Each lady was assigned a task: to tend the orphans of St. Mildred's, to write letters of compassion to widows, to offer their prized jewels in service of charity. Yet even in virtue, the ton found ways to perform. Their smiles were rehearsed, their laughter measured, their gestures choreographed to catch a duke's notice. They spoke of love as though it were a stage, and every act a line to deliver. Lance observed in silence. He had crafted this challenge to unmask vanity, but watching them now he saw only masks upon masks. None spoke of love, only of victory. The air itself seemed perfumed with deceit. And then, as if the gods themselves sought to mock all pretense, he noticed her. Jovita. She stood apart from the crowd, a simple figure amid finery, her apron dusted with flour from the kitchens. She was not part of the test, not meant to be seen. Yet, when an elderly servant stumbled beneath the weight of silver trays, it was Jovita who rushed forward. She did not hesitate, did not glance about for approval. She knelt, lifted the trays, soothed the servant's trembling hands, and smiled, softly, as if kindness itself required no witness. Lance's breath caught, though none would have seen it. From the balcony above, his gaze lingered, longer than propriety allowed. The contrast struck him like lightning through glass, the grand hall glittering with ambition below, and one quiet maid performing the very virtue he sought in vain. And thus began the whispers. The Duke watches his maid more than the debutantes. They say she has bewitched him. Imagine a maid. Perhaps he means to make her his charity project. Laughter followed, sweet as poison. Fans fluttered like wings, carrying rumour to every corner of the ballroom. But Jovita, unaware or simply unwilling to care, continued her duties. When mockery came, she endured it in silence, her composure a rebuke sharper than any word. Lady Marjorie, ever eager to reclaim the Duke's attention, sneered as she passed. "Some creatures mistake pity for affection," she murmured loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, "but a servant's shadow will never touch the sun." Jovita said nothing. She only looked at Marjorie once, her gaze steady, neither defiant nor broken, but quietly resolute. It unsettled the lady far more than anger would have. Meanwhile, the Duke moved through his guests, yet every polished smile grated against his patience. The women's laughter clanged like false notes, their words as hollow as gilded masks. He felt trapped in a theatre of affection, watching every performer recite lines about love they had never known. And yet through every act, his thoughts strayed to the maid, to her soft-spoken courage, her unguarded grace. He found excuses to pass near the servants' quarters, to glimpse her at work arranging flowers, her hands steady even as gossip swirled like smoke around her. He should have looked away, but he did not. The orchestra swelled in the evening's second dance, and Lance stood at the edge of the marble floor, watching his guests move like painted figures in a portrait. Across the room, Jovita carried a fresh pitcher of wine. The candlelight found her hair, turning it to strands of bronze. For one fleeting moment she looked up, and their eyes met. It was not a look meant for discovery. It was quiet, unguarded, filled with something neither dared name. The music seemed to fade, the laughter dulled to a hum. And though neither spoke, something unspoken passed between them, something forbidden, something inevitable. The Duke's closest adviser leaned toward him with a forced chuckle. "You'll frighten the ladies, my lord, if you stare at the help so intently." Lance did not answer. His jaw tightened, his expression composed, yet the words lodged in his chest like a blade. Later, as the contests concluded and the noblewomen presented their letters and jewelled offerings, Lance read them with detached courtesy. The words were beautiful, polished, and utterly lifeless. He praised each in turn, offering polite nods, but his mind was elsewhere, on the girl who had no parchment, no jewels, and no claim to the game she had already won. By night's end, rumour had outpaced the music. It whispered through drawing rooms and across the ballroom steps, the Duke's gaze, the maid's blush, the scandal waiting to bloom. Some called it pity, others called it intrigue, but none could deny what they had seen, a man of rank watching a servant as though the rest of the world had ceased to matter. In the servants' hall, Jovita heard the echoes of those whispers carried by cruel tongues. "He pities her," one snickered. "She will be dismissed before morning." Yet even then she did not flinch. She folded linens by candlelight, her heart steady, though a strange warmth had taken root beneath her ribs, a feeling both terrifying and exquisite. Above, in his study, the Duke stood alone before the fire. He still held the handkerchief he had given her that night of humiliation, now washed and folded, returned discreetly to his desk. He turned it over in his hand, wondering how a thing so simple could weigh more than his title. Duty told him to forget her. Honour demanded distance. But desire, quiet, undeniable, began to whisper otherwise. And so, the game of hearts and honour continued, unseen by the ton but watched closely by fate. One maid, unaware she was being tested. One Duke, realising that every measure of virtue he sought among diamonds and lace had already been found in the quiet of a servant's heart. Would he guard his honour, or risk it all for love, dear listener? By now, my listeners, even the most disciplined of hearts must confess, this tale burns far hotter than propriety allows. If you find yourself as breathless as our Duke beneath the chandeliers, then subscribe at once, for every scandal henceforth promises to outshine the last. I should hate for you to miss the next whispered catastrophe. The night was long and heavy with anticipation. Candles bled slow tears of wax across polished sconces, casting wavering light along the endless corridors of Dunstone Hall. The echoes of laughter and string music from the ballroom had long since faded into silence. Only the distant clatter of servants cleaning away the remnants of the evening remained, and among them, one quiet maid whose thoughts refused to still. Jovita carried a tray of crystal goblets down the marble passageway, her steps careful, her breath steady, though her heart was anything but calm. Ever since the Duke's gaze had lingered upon her that morning, whispers had followed her like a shadow. Each curtained glance, each hushed exchange of fans behind silk gloves, all of it spoke of mockery dressed as civility. Yet beneath the sting of gossip, something deeper stirred, curiosity, perhaps even longing. The Duke of Dunstone was not as she had imagined. Beneath his composure, she sensed something restrained, something that ached to be understood. She had just turned into the west corridor when a voice broke through the quiet. "Leave it, Miss Jovita. I will see to those myself." Her breath caught. Lance stood at the far end of the hallway, half in shadow, his hands clasped behind his back. The candlelight carved solemn lines across his face, softening the steel in his eyes. She bowed instinctively, unsure if she should stay or flee. "My lord," she murmured, keeping her gaze low. "I did not expect—" "Nor did I," he interrupted gently, a trace of exhaustion in his voice. "These corridors feel emptier than they once did. My mother's presence lingers still, and I find myself wandering them when sleep refuses me." Jovita hesitated, uncertain if he spoke to her or the walls. The mention of the late Duchess, the one who had once ruled these halls with elegance and quiet severity, stirred a pang of sympathy she dared not express aloud. "I hear she was beloved," she offered quietly. "She was formidable," he corrected, his lips curving with faint irony, "and wise enough to bind her will with one final command." This ridiculous contest you see paraded through my house is not my idea of courtship." He turned toward her fully now, and in his eyes flickered something raw, a vulnerability carefully hidden beneath the armour of nobility. "She wished to ensure," he continued, "that I would marry not for alliance or ambition but for affection." Her words, "Only a woman who loves you without advantage may stand beside you." Jovita's pulse quickened. She dared to meet his gaze then, the flicker of the candles reflected in his eyes like trembling gold. "And do you believe such love exists, my lord?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with quiet intensity, he replied, "I have known war's deceit, but not love's honesty." The confession hung between them, heavy and fragile. The air itself seemed to still. Jovita could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the warmth rising to her cheeks. She should have stepped back. She should have curtsied and left him to his solitude. But when their hands brushed as she reached to take the empty goblet from his grasp, a current surged through her, something unspoken, forbidden, undeniable. His fingers stilled against hers, neither withdrawing. His voice softened. "You carry yourself as though the world has forgotten your worth." "I serve because I must," she said, barely above a whisper. "It is not my place to be seen." "And yet," he murmured, "I see you." The words struck like lightning cloaked in silk, both terrifying and tender. For a single heartbeat, the Duke of Dunstone and the maid of no title stood suspended in something that defied sense or station. But reason soon returned, cold as marble. Jovita drew back her hand, bowing swiftly. "You are kind, my lord, but you must not say such things." He did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the portrait at the end of the corridor. The late Duchess, in her regal stillness, painted long before the war had hardened her son. "Kindness," he said finally, his tone quiet and unreadable, "is rarely without consequence." He stepped past her then, his cloak brushing the air with the scent of rain and cedar. Yet even as he walked away, she felt the imprint of that moment seared upon her skin. Later that night, while the grand house slumbered, the music of scandal stirred again. In the drawing room, dimly lit by dying embers, 3 noblewomen whispered beneath a cascade of lace and jewels. Lady Marjorie leaned close to her companions, her voice low and venomous. "The Duke's maid grows bold," she hissed. "He looks at her as though she were born of silk, not servitude." Her friend, Lady Clarissa, gave a derisive laugh. "Then let him see her as she truly is, a thief in borrowed finery. A missing trinket here, a misplaced brooch there. It takes so little to ruin the unprotected." Marjorie's smile glimmered like a blade. "Precisely. Let her be accused, and let him see the folly of his infatuation. No duke weds disgrace." They clinked their crystal glasses together in a mock toast, a pact of malice sealed beneath the stars. Unseen, Jovita passed by the half-open door, pausing when her name surfaced amid their laughter. She froze, her pulse hammering in her throat. The words struck like stones: thief, disgrace, ruin. Her fingers tightened around the tray she carried. She dared a glance through the crack of the door, seeing their faces illuminated by the dying fire, faces beautiful and cruel. They meant to destroy her. Slowly she retreated into the shadows, heart pounding with equal parts fear and disbelief. Every kindness, every quiet act she had given had earned her nothing but envy. But what frightened her most was not their scheme. It was the truth that had already taken root in her heart, that a single glance from the Duke, a single word spoken in confidence, had become something she could no longer suppress. And now, love, foolish, impossible love, would cost her everything. In his chamber above, the Duke sat beside the unlit hearth, staring at the letter his mother had left behind. Her words echoed like prophecy. "You will find her not among diamonds, but among dust, the one who loves without gain." He thought of Jovita's hands, steady in service, trembling only when they touched his own. of her quiet courage, her grace unpolished by ambition. He did not yet know that the world below already plotted her undoing. But perhaps, he thought, as the candle flickered low, love's honesty was not a fantasy after all, merely hidden, waiting for the courage to be seen. And though neither could know it, the first test of that love had already begun. Morning broke over Dunstone Hall with deceptive serenity, the pale light spilling through diamond-paned windows, gilding marble floors and polished silver. Servants hurried with trays and ribbons, arranging the ballroom for what was to be the grand conclusion of the Duke's test of true love. Every lady of rank awaited the ceremony with rehearsed smiles and sharpened hopes. But beneath the glitter of chandeliers, something foul stirred. A secret born not of love, but of envy. Jovita stood near the side entrance, her apron fresh, her expression calm though her heart trembled with quiet unease. She had slept little. The whisper of the noblewomen's plotting haunted her through the night. Still, she had come to serve as she always did, to stand with dignity, invisible yet present. The orchestra tuned their strings. Guests gathered like jewelled vultures, the murmur of expectation filling the room. And at the centre of it all stood Lance, Duke of Dunstone, tall, composed and silent as the storm brewing outside. His gaze swept the hall, lingering for the briefest moment upon the maid who did not belong there, the one woman whose honesty had begun to unmake him. A hush fell as Lady Marjorie glided forward. Her gown shimmered in shades of envy, green silk and pride stitched together. She held a folded letter, pressed dramatically to her chest, her eyes glistening with tears too perfect to be real. "My lord," she began, her voice trembling with false virtue, "I would rather die than speak ill of another soul, yet the honour of your household compels me." The crowd leaned in, fans stilled, even the air seemed to pause. Marjorie unfolded the letter with deliberate grace. "This," she declared, "was found in the servants' wing, a confession, from one who claims to have stolen silver from your mother's collection and hidden it among her own effects." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Lance's brows furrowed. "A confession?" "Indeed," Marjorie replied, dabbing theatrically at her eyes. "Signed by the hand of your maid, Jovita." Every head turned. The murmurs became daggers. "The maid?" "I knew it." "So that's how she caught his eye." Jovita's breath fled her chest. "That is not mine," she whispered, stepping back as the crowd closed in with hungry curiosity. "I would never—" "Silence," hissed another lady, feigning outrage. "Have you no shame, girl?" The Duke's counsel, grey-haired, grim and bound by politics, stepped forward. "Your Grace," intoned Lord Godfrey, his tone heavy with self-importance, "the reputation of your estate demands swift action. A theft of family relics cannot be ignored." Lance's jaw tightened. The murmur around him pressed like a weight. He looked at Jovita, saw the disbelief in her eyes, the wounded pride trembling behind her restraint. For one dreadful instant he nearly spoke, nearly shattered decorum to say what burned in his chest. "She is innocent." But duty gripped him like iron. The Duchess's will, the contest, the eyes of all society, every strand of power and reputation bound him to silence. If he defended her now, if he broke the order of the test, it would all collapse. The title, the name, the fragile illusion of honour. So he said nothing, not a word. And silence, when spoken by a man of power, can wound more deeply than accusation. Jovita's breath caught. She waited, once, twice, for the defence that did not come. When it didn't, something inside her cracked with a soundless ache. "My lord," she managed, her voice trembling but clear, "you know me." Lance's gaze faltered. He looked at the floor. "Take her away," murmured the councilman. "Dismiss her from service until the matter is resolved." The words fell like a verdict. Jovita turned, tears blurring the room into a smear of gold and marble. She did not wait for the guards nor for the sneers of the women who had orchestrated her fall. She ran, through the ballroom doors, through the echoing corridors, until the cold morning air struck her face. The heavens, it seemed, shared her grief. Clouds rolled in, low and swollen, and rain began to fall, first in drops, then in sheets. She stumbled into the rose gardens, her shoes sinking into the soaked earth. The once bright blossoms drooped beneath the weight of the storm. She pressed a trembling hand against the stone fountain, gasping for breath as tears mingled with rain. The world blurred, petals, water, sky, all dissolving into sorrow. "Why?" she whispered to no one. "Why did you not speak?" Inside the hall, Lance stood unmoving, every whisper slicing him open. His council praised his restraint. The noblewomen fluttered their fans, whispering condolences that reeked of satisfaction. Yet none of it reached him. His mind was filled only with her eyes. The moment they broke, the way she had looked at him as though seeing the truth at last, that his pride had cost her everything. He turned away from the crowd, striding into the empty corridor, the echo of his boots haunting in the silence. Beyond the windows the storm raged. He saw her figure through the glass, small, drenched, alone among the roses. His heart lurched forward, but again he hesitated. How strange that a man who had faced battlefields unflinching now trembled before the simple act of love. And so he watched the woman who had shown him honesty collapse beneath the weight of his silence. Above the storm my pen moved, and thus the Duke who sought love proved as bound by pride as any man of rank. The tongue will speak of that morning for seasons to come. They will recall the rain, the whispers, the look in his eyes as she fled. Some will call it scandal, others tragedy. But I, ever faithful to the truth beneath silken titles, call it what it truly was, a test not of love, but of courage. And courage, dear listeners, is a virtue our Duke has yet to learn. The night had long since fallen upon Dunstone Hall, heavy with shame and silence. Rain whispered against the tall windows, a ceaseless rhythm echoing the unrest within the Duke's heart. Lance sat alone in his study, his fingers pressed to his temples, the fire before him burning low, a restless, accusing flame. All day the house had been abuzz with whispers, the maid's disgrace, the noblewomen's triumph, his silence, his failure. He had tried to convince himself that he had done what duty required, that the name of Dunstone must remain unsullied, no matter the personal cost. But as the rain deepened into a steady downpour, so too did his unease. He had not eaten. He had not spoken. He had only stared at the unopened envelope that lay upon his desk, sealed in wax and marked with the crest of his steward. When at last he broke the seal, the truth stared back at him like a ghost. It was a confession, a trembling scrawl in the hand of one of his footmen. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I accepted coin from Lady Marjorie to place a letter among the maid's belongings. I did not know it would come to ruin her. She promised safety if I obeyed, but I cannot bear this guilt. The maid is innocent." The words blurred as he read them again and again. Guilt, thick and suffocating, wrapped its claws around his chest. He rose from his chair, the paper trembling in his grasp. Every image of Jovita, her quiet dignity, her unwavering kindness, the look in her eyes when he failed to defend her, cut him anew. He could no longer bear the weight of his silence. "My mother spoke of love as a man's truest measure," he murmured bitterly to the empty room, "and I have measured myself and found nothing but cowardice." Outside, thunder rolled across the moors like a drum of reckoning. The Duke of Dunstone, who had once faced war without flinching, now felt his knees weaken beneath the gravity of one woman's suffering, a woman he had wronged in ways no apology could ever erase. He gathered the letter and strode from the room, the doors slamming open with force enough to startle the guards in the hall. Servants whispered his name as he passed, their eyes wide. Never had their master crossed into the servants' wing, and certainly not in the dead of night. But he did not slow. Pride, that ancient companion, fell away with every step. Meanwhile, my latest column had already set the city aflame. "It appears," I had written, "that London's brightest jewels are but glass in disguise, for while they glittered in triumph, An innocent heart bled in silence. The Duke's household, so lauded for its virtue, now stands upon a precipice, and one wonders, dear readers, if pride will finally give way to love. By morning, the Tun would be breathless with speculation. But for now, as lightning split the sky, my quill fell still. For I knew, even as my words took flight, that the Duke was already on the move. In the dim corridor of the servants' quarters, Jovita packed her few belongings into a worn satchel. Her hands shook, not from fear but from exhaustion. The rain had not ceased since her dismissal. It seemed even the heavens wept for the injustice of it all. Her dress clung to her still from her earlier flight through the gardens, her hair hung damp against her cheeks. Yet her eyes, red though they were, held no hatred, only resignation. This house was never meant to be kind, she whispered to herself, folding the small apron she had worn since girlhood. And love is not for those like me. The door burst open. Her head snapped up. There, framed by the lantern's trembling light, stood Lance, his cloak soaked through, his expression stripped of its noble mask. Gone was the Duke's distance, gone the commanding hauteur that had once made servants lower their eyes. In its place was something raw and human, desperation. He stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath his boots. For a long moment neither spoke, only the storm filled the silence. "Jovita," he said at last, his voice low, ragged. "You must not leave." She turned away, clutching her satchel. "I must, my lord. There is no place here for thieves or for those who make your guests uncomfortable with their presence. You are no thief. Forgive me, but your counsel disagrees." "I was wrong," he said sharply, taking another step closer. The tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I was blind, foolish. I let them tear you down because I feared losing the approval of those who matter least." Jovita's breath caught, her back still to him. "And now, what would you have of me? Gratitude? I have no fine words left to give." He closed the distance between them and placed the crumpled confession upon the table. The ink had smudged from the rain, but the truth was clear. "Read it," he said. "Read, and know that you were betrayed, not by me, though my silence was its own crime, but by those who sought to wound you for daring to be noticed." She turned, her eyes widening as she read the letter. When she finished, her lips parted, trembling, yet no sound emerged. "I cannot undo what was done," he whispered, "but I can kneel." And then, before her disbelieving gaze, the Duke of Dunstone, the man who ruled over half of Somerset and commanded the respect of kings, sank to his knees upon the cold, uneven floor. Rain drummed against the window like a hymn for penance. "I would trade every title I possess to undo your pain," he said softly. "Every acre, every ounce of reputation. For what is honour if it silences truth? What is power if it cannot protect the one heart that believed in me?" Jovita's throat ached. "You cannot mean this." "I mean every word," he said, looking up at her. His eyes, once proud, now burned only with sincerity. "I should have defended you. I should have fought. Instead, I let the world think you guilty while knowing deep within that you were the only soul among us who had nothing to hide." She sank slowly to her knees before him, her tears mingling with the rain that slipped through the cracked window pane. "You hurt me," she whispered, "more deeply than you could ever know." "I know," he breathed, "and yet I beg, not for forgiveness I deserve, but for the chance to earn it." For a moment they remained there, Duke and maid, equals at last in sorrow and truth. The storm raged beyond, but within the small chamber something shifted. The walls that had divided rank from heart, duty from desire, began to crumble. Finally she reached out, hesitantly, and touched his face. Her fingers brushed the rough stubble along his jaw, a gesture so simple and so pure it broke what little restraint remained in him. "Rise, my lord," she said softly. "You have knelt enough for one lifetime." But he did not rise. He only pressed her hand to his lips, his voice breaking. Not until you believe I love you still." And though she did not say it then, the look in her eyes was answer enough. Through pride's ruin, love had begun its quiet resurrection. The chandeliers of Dunstone Hall blazed brighter than they had in years, their golden light casting diamonds of fire across silk gowns and polished marble. The orchestra played the final waltz, and London's finest swirled in glittering circles, blissfully unaware that before the night ended, their world and their gossip would change forever. At the centre of it all stood Lance, Duke of Dunstone, tall and solemn beneath the brilliance. His eyes swept the crowd, a sea of smiles painted in deceit. The nobles laughed, their jewels trembling like false stars, while whispers of the contest's nearing conclusion flitted between painted lips. Lady Marjorie, resplendent in emerald satin, stood nearest the dais, her fan fluttering with barely concealed excitement. She was certain victory was hers. I, of course, was there, hidden among the plumes and powdered wigs, watching through my quill's invisible veil. The Duke's expression was unreadable, carved from the same marble as his ancestral statues. Yet I had seen the tremor in his hands, the haunted resolve that had followed him since the night of the maid's departure. Tonight, dear listener, pride was about to kneel before the very eyes that once mocked humility. The orchestra came to a hush. The dancers stilled. Lance lifted his hand, commanding silence without a single word. The vast hall obeyed. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice echoing across the expanse, "for days this house has entertained a contest of hearts, a test not of beauty nor of birth, but of sincerity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fans paused mid-wave. Marjorie straightened, her lips curving into a smile practiced before her mirror. He continued, his gaze unflinching. "Tonight, I end that test, for I have made my choice." Marjorie's gloved hand rose to her breast, the faintest tremor of triumph flashing in her eyes. "The contest," he said, "is over. I have chosen the one woman who never sought to win me." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The orchestra's conductor faltered, his bow suspended mid-air. Marjorie's smile froze, her fan slipping from her grasp. It struck the floor with a soft, tragic flutter. Her voice broke through the stunned silence. Then, "Who, Your Grace?" Every head turned. Every whisper stilled. Lance descended from the dais, his steps measured, deliberate. His gaze passed over jewelled ladies and powdered courtiers until it settled upon the far end of the hall, where a figure stood half in shadow, summoned not by invitation but by conscience. Jovita, the maid, in a gown borrowed from kindness, simple yet radiant in its humility. She stood as though unsure whether to flee or breathe. Her hands trembled at her sides. The crowd parted around her like the sea retreating from scandal. Lance approached her slowly, the murmurs swelling into disbelief. "If love be a scandal," he said, voice firm enough to silence a room that had feasted on whispers, "let it be mine alone." For a heartbeat, London itself forgot how to speak. Then chaos erupted. Fans snapped shut, men murmured curses, mothers clutched their daughters as if to shield them from the contagion of disgrace. Lady Marjorie, struck by the cruel weight of truth, emitted a gasp so theatrical it might have earned applause had the moment not belonged to someone else entirely. She swayed, her jewelled tiara glinting, and then, as expected, she fainted with exquisite precision into the arms of her horrified suitor. But Lance did not turn. He saw only Jovita. He reached for her hand. Her breath caught as his fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, unashamed. She tried to speak, but words failed. The Duke who had once bound his heart in armour now held hers before all of London, bare and unguarded. Whispers surged like wildfire. "He's lost his mind. A servant. He'll ruin himself." And yet, dear listeners, ruin never looked so much like freedom. The orchestra master, trembling, looked toward the Duke for instruction. Lance nodded once, a silent command. The strings lifted again, tentative, uncertain. The first notes of the waltz trembled through the hall. To the disbelief of the gathered ton, the Duke of Dunstone led the maid to the centre of the floor. Every eye followed as he placed his hand at her waist, guiding her gently into the rhythm. She hesitated. "My lord, they are watching." "Then let them learn what love looks like," he murmured. And they began to dance. The chandeliers caught the movement of her gown, the soft blue fabric swirling like moonlight against his dark coat. Her bare shoulders glimmered with droplets of candlelight. His gaze, steady and reverent, never left her face. Each turn, each step, became a quiet rebellion. The crowd did not breathe. Whispers became awe. Lady Marjorie, revived by the commotion, blinked up from her chaise only to behold the sight. The Duke she had pursued now waltzing with the woman she had sought to destroy. Her expression curdled from disbelief to horror, and though she tried to rise, her composure collapsed once more under the cruel weight of envy. As for Jovita, she seemed suspended between worlds, one of scandal and another of salvation. "You'll be ruined," she whispered as he turned her beneath the light. "Then let ruin be the price of truth," he replied softly. "You taught me that love without courage is not love at all." Ah, how the mighty tremble when humility waltzes among them. I stood near the edge of the floor, my quill trembling with delight. Never had I witnessed such elegant defiance. Never had a ballroom so gilded with hypocrisy been forced to witness sincerity so pure. And I confess, even my ink could not keep pace with the poetry unfolding before me. Around them, whispers softened into wonder. The Duchess Dowager herself lowered her glass. Even the orchestra, emboldened now, played louder, the violins swelling as though in celebration. The Duke bent his head toward Jovita, his voice audible only to her. "You once told me that love was not meant to be seen. Tonight I wish the world to see nothing else." Her lips parted, trembling, her eyes glistening in disbelief. And then, at last, she smiled. They turned together, a perfect circle of grace and defiance, their movements neither hurried nor hesitant. The waltz ended not with applause but with silence, the kind that follows revelation. Lance bowed low before her. She curtsied, and in that bow centuries of distance between rank and heart seemed to vanish. No one dared move. The nobles stared, stunned into stillness by a truth that could not be gossiped away, that the Duke had not chosen to rebel, he had chosen to love. I lifted my quill and sealed the moment in ink. And thus, dear reader, Dunstone was not shamed, but redeemed, for love, once hidden beneath dust and duty, had risen to claim its rightful place beneath the chandeliers. And as they stood in the golden hush of the ballroom, I thought, perhaps scandal, when born of truth, is the noblest story of all. Weeks have passed since that most unorthodox of waltzes at Dunstone Hall, yet the ton still murmurs, still dreams, still argues whether it was courage or madness that guided the Duke's heart. My sources, ever dependable and delightfully indiscreet, inform me that London's grandest scandal has now ripened into its sweetest triumph. For this morning, within the quiet grace of St. Aldwyn's Chapel, beneath arches dusted in sunlight and scandal alike, the Duke of Dunstone has taken vows not with a countess nor a baron's daughter, but with the very woman whose name once set drawing rooms aflame, the maid who would become a duchess. The pews overflowed with curiosity disguised as piety. Even the most pious of matrons could not resist attending the ceremony they once swore they would boycott. I confess, dear listener, I too sat among them, my veil lowered and my quill trembling with anticipation. For though London had condemned the Duke, it appears no one could resist the theatre of his redemption. The ceremony was simple, disarmingly so. No jewelled tiaras, no golden embroidery, no choirs of sycophants. Only a man and a woman standing before God and the world, their hands clasped as though they feared to wake from a dream. Jovita, radiant in ivory lace, carried not diamonds but daisies, her calm composure outshining every duchess who had ever preened in that chapel. And Lance, our once hardened duke, looked upon her as though no title, no crown, no empire could rival what he held. When the vows were spoken, a hush fell upon the chapel. I swear, even London's most notorious gossips forgot to breathe. His voice, steady, humble, trembled only once when he said her name. And when the priest declared them husband and wife, the very sunlight seemed to break through the stained glass, scattering colours across her veil like a blessing from heaven itself. Outside, the world waited with bated breath. The nobles expected outrage, perhaps chaos. Instead, they were met with something far more dangerous. Applause. Slow, tentative at first, but growing. One pair of gloved hands, then another, until the entire crowd rose in reluctant, astonished respect. For once, London chose admiration over malice. Even the crown, that stern guardian of decorum, sent word of congratulations by the following day, a gesture that stunned the ton into uneasy civility. It seems, my dear audience, that when a duke dares to follow his heart rather than his heritage, even monarchs must concede defeat. And thus the gossip that once burned like wildfire has cooled into legend. Ladies who once mocked the name Jovita now whisper it with wistful envy, as though courage were a new kind of fashion. Men who once condemned the Duke for folly now raise their glasses to toast his freedom. For who among them, I wonder, would not trade their gold for a love unburdened by pretense? Yet I, ever the observer, must confess that the true beauty of this tale lies not within the chapel's vows but in what followed. Picture it. Dawn over Dunstone Hall. The morning mist curls like silk ribbons across the gardens, soft and glimmering with dew. The estate, once cold and empty, breathes again, laughter echoing through corridors that had long known only silence. Upon the eastern balcony, Jovita stands wrapped in light, her hands resting upon the balustrade as she gazes over the lands that were once forbidden to her. Her gown, not grand but graceful, stirs in the breeze, the lace of her sleeves catching the pale sunlight. No longer servant, no longer shadow, she stands as Duchess, not by title alone, but by the quiet strength that carried her through ruin and ridicule. Behind her, footsteps approach. She turns, and there he is, Lance, the man who once ruled the ton and lost himself in its judgment. His smile is softer now, the lines of pride melted into warmth. He steps forward, wrapping her gently in his arms. "You are awake early," he murmurs. "I feared it might all be a dream," she replies, leaning into him. "Then let us never sleep again." Simple words, and yet they carry the weight of everything lost and found. The wind stirs the garden below. The roses sway like courtiers bowing to their new sovereigns. And though London may still whisper, for once its whispers are kind. I close my quill upon this image. Two hearts once divided by station, now joined by grace. The Duke's redemption is complete, his defiance rewritten into devotion. The maid's humiliation has become her crown. And so, as the bells of Dunstone toll in celebration, I leave you with this truth, whispered through every corner of the ton and every heart that dares to hope. In a ballroom of 150 noblewomen, it was a single maid who passed the only test that mattered, the test of the heart. And thus, love, once humiliated, now reigns. Do you believe, dear listener, that redemption rewrites every sin of pride? Whisper below and stay tuned, for London never runs short of love, nor of scandal worthy of my quill. And so London whispers still, though my ink runs dry for now. Should your heart crave another waltz of ruin and redemption, another secret carried beneath lace and titles, you know where to find me. Subscribe, my devoted listeners, and let us meet again where scandal and love so sweetly intertwine.